Welcome, everybody. Today, we are with a good friend of mine, AJ Sims. So AJ's been a coach forever, basically. You were brought up by Jay Cutler when you were like a teenager.
Yeah. Well, Kurt, right? Thank you for having me, brother. I mean, I consider you one of the greatest minds currently that we have in the industry. And I think everybody should be privileged that we have you. So it's definitely a blessing to be able to bring medical knowledge into bodybuilding with someone that's actually passionate about bodybuilding in a sense. Not only that, but also wants to help individuals like we've talked about so much. So, dude, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, I mean, I've been around the block for quite some time, and I was fortunate enough to come up with Cutler as a teenager, learned a lot of things from him. It's been a phenomenal ride, a phenomenal journey. And I'm doing these podcasts with individuals that I truly enjoy speaking to, that I think are giving back to the industry, that are not just out for themselves, because we know that there's a lot of people like that. So if you guys see me appear on these podcasts, it's because I'm handpicking these people, and it's a privilege and an honor to actually be on here. And I really respect Kurt as being one of the greatest minds we currently have right now. So
thanks, AJ.
Props on everything you're doing, brother.
Thank you. So we were talking, you and I had a couple different ideas of things we could talk about over the next couple weeks on podcasts. And I think we just started talking about just general like testosterone usage in bodybuilders or athletes, and what kind of the deal was when setting up a cycle. If you want to go with, you want to start with what your initial
yeah. So before we got on camera, we were just briefly talking, as obviously, the foundation of any cycle or athletic performance or TRT is going to be, testosterone, typically cypionate, unless it's coming from a compounding pharmacy, and it could be a blend of something. So, just talking about the fact that a lot of guys believe that there's magic when you get to a specific milligram dosage per week. That could be anywhere from 2,000 and higher per week. So basically, I was speaking to Kurt about, from a super physiological standpoint on labs, nanograms per deciliter of testosterone, total testosterone, and free testosterone. I mean, at what point does an individual get to where we know that it's really just beating a dead horse? You're not really getting more tissue per se out of more milligrams.
Well, so and I talked about this on another podcast recently, just to define like what physiological and super physiological is. So we would consider medically a dose over 250 to be considered super physiological, even though, like, as you know, if you were to inject 250 milligrams of testosterone cypionate, it's clearly going to put your blood level higher than any normal human is ever going to go. As far as I know, there's only been one natural person in the world that's ever been tested over 1100. I could be wrong. That's the highest I've ever seen in any study, and that was one individual in the entire world. So high would be considered in the 900s. Right? If you're running 900 as a teenager, you're doing well.
Phenomenal.
And what it seems that your response is more related to is your androgen receptor density than it is the actual hormone level. So like you said, so if you keep pushing the level up, just having testosterone in serum, especially if it's total testosterone, doesn't necessarily mean it's doing anything. Most of it's bound. And we know from a science point of view that if you average at 1,400 nanograms per deciliter, that seems to be about the minimum required to cause hypertrophy on its own. So if you have, I don't remember the number, if you have, like, let's say 7 or 8 levers that you could pull to cause muscle growth in the human body, right? Insulin, IGF, the AR, all the different possible food, you have mTOR. If you were to just remove that and just use the androgen receptor for growth, like assuming food is not optimal, nothing else is optimal, and everything else were removed, you would need at least 1,400 nanograms per deciliter on an average in order to cause growth. Yeah. So when you see guys at like 6,000, right? Like some of the bigger pros, like you look at their labs and they're over 5,000, they're over 6,000. Yeah. What is it exactly doing? I don't think it's much as you think, right? Yeah. There's a point that everyone gets to where it's just overflow at a certain point, and there's just not enough receptors to handle it, right? And that's generally where you would add something else in, right? Like you don't typically run testosterone just endlessly high. At least most guys. Some of the open guys might.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that one individual getting up to 6,000 plus is just going to experience possibly more side effects more than anything, possibly, right? Yeah. Over a long period of time. So, that was kind of my thinking, which is why, when I map out, even for some of the biggest pros and the Olympians that I put on stage in the top 10, we haven't got close to 2,000 milligrams of test a week. Not saying that works or doesn't work. I'm just telling you anecdotally from what I've seen, you can get a lot out of, proper application combined with other compounds as well. And then, synergizing that properly with nutrition, with recovery, with training, and making sure that everything internally is flowing exactly how it should. I mean, what we were saying before is, a lot of the pros are looking kind of for the ace card. And I think amateurs too, right? That there's some magical formulation out there when, there's really nothing new under the sun, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Joe Weider and Weider Farms out in California is not growing special food that these pros are eating. It comes down to a genetic response. I think these guys are hyper responders in a fact that not only do they hyper respond to smaller amounts or maybe moderate amounts, even though they want to go higher than that, they are hyper responding to that, but they also get less side effects.
Yep.
And I think that is what determines a really great pro when you pair that with the work ethic, obviously, and just years of honing in on your craft. But man, that what I've seen, just guys that just respond to minimal things, where if the average guy took it, I mean, there's a little bit of a response, but there's not much happening. And it's just like one of those things where you kind of have to, check yourself as a competitor if this is something you're really going to realistically pursue, because getting to that level, even at a pro qualifier at the nationals, is hard in and of itself. And then getting to the pro level and being a good pro at the Olympia, I mean, you're talking top 10, 15 in the world.
Yeah.
It's just another whole ball game, man. And these guys are just on another level. So yeah, that was just kind of an interesting thing, because I know over the years I've worked with a lot of guys, and they've always asked me, hey man, let's, what happens if we push the test high? Are we actually going to see something happen? And more times than not, you don't really see anything really more happening, except, like I said, side effects, blood pressure possibly going up acutely for a period of time or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, that was very interesting that, because I know we see eye to eye on a whole lot of things. So that was pretty cool, man.
And so people understand how that's like why the side effects versus like the muscle response. So you have three basic places where there's androgen receptors within a cell. So and most cells in the human body have some level of receptors. You have the classic one, which goes to the cell surface, basically binds with a ligand like testosterone and brings to the nucleus and causes protein synthesis. Mm-hmm. That's what ideally we're looking for when you use any steroid. You also have ones that stay on the cell surface, similar to an insulin receptor, that don't really go inside. They're what we call non-genomic. That's where the side effects come from. That's also where you get strength gains from and those things. So like if someone uses halotestin or Anadrol or even Anavar to some degree, and they get an immediate strength gain within a day or two, or sometimes within hours, that would be considered non-genomic. Those receptors don't ever grow tissue. They just cause those responses. They're also found on other cells, your kidneys, your liver, your heart, your brain. And that's also where some of these issues come, right? If you take too many androgens, you start hitting all these overflow. Basically, the body will prioritize where androgens go and if it's going to 5-alpha reduce it or not, depending on the tissue, but it doesn't ideally want to push a ton. It's not trying to grow your kidneys, but you will eventually if you continue to keep levels too high. And then there's one that's basically irrelevant. Currently, we don't know what it does. It's called the subcellular androgen receptor. It's basically in the cytoplasm. We don't know what it does. It doesn't go anywhere. And the only commonly used drug that binds to it is Winstrol. What it's doing, we don't know. So it's kind of like when you see Winstrol used, you can use it concurrently with other strong AR things like Trenbolone, PremoMasteron. And it doesn't seem to, it seems to magnify those effects. It doesn't really seem to add more milligrams. Like, if you stack testosterone and Premo and Tren and, Nandrolone, you just stacked all these things that just are AR activating compounds on top of each other. You're just stacking milligrams. There's a certain point where you run out of usefulness, right? Like it's kind of redundant. Yeah. What are you doing?
Yes.
You're just magnifying versus if you stack certain other things, right? You stack Anadrol, which has no AR function, with Tren, they magnify the effects. I don't know if you've ever seen this, or D-ball does it too, to some degree. Yeah. Like those two compounds together are very synergistic. It's like 1 + 1 = 3 versus like testosterone and Premo together is 1 + 1.
Yeah. So there's synergy. There's synergy in what
you're doing. Only in those weird compounds. It's not like you see a little bit of that with Winstrol too.
Yeah. So I think the smartest route is not maxing out dosage per se, but finding synergy in the compounds.
Yeah. And a reason for using things, right? Like there's a logical reason as a coach when you're looking at an athlete, depending on where they are, what their goal is, what you would use, right?
Yeah. We've talked about this. Yeah, we've talked about this, and I know you've beaten this into, and hopefully people are catching wind that, the new thing obviously is utilizing PremoMasteron and Masteron as your AI, because people are petrified of using Arimidex or Aromacin or anything like that, or even Letrozole, right? Because they feel like it's too harsh, or it's going to crush your estrogen too much, or it's a little harsher on the lipids. But it's like the thinking behind it is you're going to be using other compounds when you could just be using an AI and I don't believe in running estrogen high. I don't know how that caught on. I'm not sure where that really got popular with, but I know for me personally on TRT, where my levels are at, the ratio is that typically, if I fall, in the 30s is where I feel the best. I hold the least amount of water and everything's flowing. Libido is good. Sleep is great. I feel good. So people that are running super, super high estrogen levels is just beyond me. So, I know you've touched on this before, but I would love for in this podcast really touch on that really popular thinking about PremoMasteron and Masteron to use as your AI.
I mean, I understand it to some degree, and I think what I've seen in the last decade. So I'm only really in the public eye in the last year, but I've been doing this. When did you start coaching? When did you?
I started coaching in 2007, but I wasn't doing this full time and at the level I have since it's been about 12 years.
Okay, so I've been in bodybuilding in some capacity since 1996.
Yeah,
but like at a very different level and natural, like looking more on the supplement end and those things. I mean, I was fortunate enough to meet Dan Duquesne when he worked for EAS years ago. But again, he really meant nothing to me at the time because I didn't really care about those sorts of things. But something I've seen, the reason why I brought that up, because in the last decade, I've seen this interesting shift, and I think social media is responsible for it. You used to have guys, right? You had guys that did steroids and had natural people, and there was no crossover, right? Maybe some natural guy eventually would run out of genetics and he would cross over, or a guy might come off drugs, but they were generally two separate groups, right? You'd see different guys in gyms. You could clearly tell who was who. And then, and hormone replacement therapy has been around for a long time. That's not new. But I think with Instagram and TikTok and all these things, it's become very popular to use TRT now. And guys that are young that probably don't need it are trying to leverage it for growth or performance. Right. And that's also why the dose is set by the FDA at that level. It's set because you're not supposed to leverage it for performance. It's supposed to replace your hormones. And then, right. And like you said, estrogen it should be kept in range. There's a reason why running it high. There was a doctor in Florida a couple of years ago that did some lectures about running it higher. And also he was talking about running hemoglobin, hematocrit high as well, which again, within reason, I don't know why you'd run that high on purpose either. And I think that kind of caught on. And then you had other guys, I think like the Victor Black model and things like that, kind of picked up on the high estrogen thing. And they kind of ran with this theory that, estrogen should be run high because in labs, you see IGF go up. What people don't really realize is that IGF responds to glucose. It's not really an estrogen thing. Like the liver needs estrogen to function, but it's not directly related. What you're seeing is bound. Again, it goes back to the serum hormone thing, DHT, testosterone, IGF. When it's in serum, it's a marker for disease. It's not a marker for performance. Like we don't look like if I'm looking at an athlete's labs, I don't care what his DHT and serum is. That's not telling me anything.
Yeah.
It's not doing anything. Same with IGF. We care what's in the muscle. Right when there's mechanical tension experienced, IGF goes into the muscle and it's spliced into MGF. That's what causes muscle growth. The stuff that's bound in serum from estrogen is not doing anything.
Yeah.
So sorry to go off on that tangent. So you go back to, and I think what happened was with social media, then the guys on TRT that were really kind of using it, they were like getting their toes wet. They really wanted to do a steroid cycle, but they were kind of nervous, or that's all their doctor would give them. They would start to leverage other compounds, right? That people would talk about, well, DHTs will lower estrogen. So instead of using an AI, you should use a drug that's not FDA approved that's not been studied for this purpose for that reason. And not only should you use it, you should use it in gram quantities.
Yeah.
Right? That's what always cracks me up. It's like guys will say Arimidex is all drugs can be risky. Aspirin is risky. If aspirin came out today, it would probably be a controlled substance.
100%.
If you can't say something like Arimidex is dangerous and then say I'm going to run a gram of Masteron.
Yeah.
It's just the silliest statement to me. There's a risk in bodybuilding that comes with bodybuilding. There's a risk in all sports, but it's like a silly thing to like assume this one thing is risky, but the other one's not, especially because the other one's not been studied in humans and men.
Yeah.
You know, there's no data to show Masteron's even remotely safe in men.
Yeah, there's no data. And I think that that's the funniest thing is we get into these tangents in bodybuilding too. And you know, you are a very data-driven guy, but you're also a very hands-on experienced guy. And that's the difference is, and I posted this yesterday, that you can absolutely apply data 100%. You can do it. But at the end of the day too, like when it comes to peaking, and we'll get into this and other things that fall into bodybuilding, some things just don't make sense on paper, especially when you're dealing with elite genetics. It doesn't make sense. And we've never done long-term clinical trials on genetic elite bodybuilders at low body fat. You never will. We're never going to get that. So we have to come to the conclusion that if you're helping an individual like that, you are taking educated guesses and risks per se, but also based off your experience. So I don't ever try to come and sound more intellectual than I actually am. I always call myself an instinctual coach. You definitely need to know specifics on what you're applying and how to apply it, but you also have to have experience to know what to do if something goes wrong. Because in a contest prep setting, or even in a health setting, if you're trying to reverse issues, if a client comes to you from another coach that there was damage done, endocrine system, GI, whatever the case may be, you have to know how to apply it, right? So that's where someone like you comes in that actually knows that data, but you do have experience because you've been in it since 1996. And you made a great point there, Kurt, because social media, it's been a blessing for guys like us. And there is a lot of good information out there, but it's also a curse because there's a lot of bad stuff. And when you see an influencer that's doing very well and they put this information out and people just kind of regurgitate it back to everybody else and it trickles down the pipeline, man, it gets a lot of people in trouble. And that's why I love what like you're doing, what Paul's doing, like getting real good people on, sharing great information and data, you know, how to prep, how to do it correctly, how to look at labs, how to read labs, you know, how to fix any issues going on internally, because we know that you can only look so good externally. And if that internal is starting to fail, it ain't going to last very long. That internal has to be running optimal for that external to really look great, but for a long period of time, because there is life outside of bodybuilding after you. Once you hang those trunks up, there is a life after, and you want to feel good. You really.
And I think you can still look really great. I think both you and I, right? I debated competing again for a while. I just think my job here is too intense. I have too much to do, and I'm just not going to happen. I'd rather focus my energy on other people at this point. I'm never going to be a great athlete, so I just think, you know. And I know you competed for a long time, so you know, I just think there's a point, you know, and I learned this from you. I think it's just sometimes it's about working harder. Like I think people are so work adverse, right, or pain adverse, suffering adverse. Anyone that doesn't follow AJ on Instagram, I mean, he wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? Something like, and you're posting pictures of the sunrise before most people are even awake. So you're already doing cardio while most people are in the middle of their, you know, REM sleep. I just think it's taught me a lot about where the priorities are. I think a lot of guys lean on things like steroids too heavily when you can really accomplish a similar thing with just putting a little more effort in. You know, I'll say the leanest I've ever been consistently was when I was younger and I was not on testosterone. Like I think it's absolutely, my brain was just in a different place. I was able to push myself and stay away from things that would lead me to not be lean easier, you know, and it's not easy. I don't think it's easy. We could always talk about that as well. Like what it takes to get super lean and stay that way. Cause I know that's something that you and I both strive for is conditioning pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely life after bodybuilding. I don't think, and that's why the health thing matters, right? Because these guys are, what the average Mr. Olympia is like 35. So that's like how old you are. Like you get to this point and all of a sudden you realize you have this another 40 years of life left. What are you going to do if your organs are all burned out?
100%. Yeah. And I think, listen, I am fully guilty of this mindset because I started competing when I was 13 years old. I did my first show. And as a teenager coming up, living in Vegas, training with Cutler, the dream was to be on the Olympia stage. That was it. That's nothing else mattered. I didn't want kids. I didn't care about anything. You don't think about that when you're 17, 18, got signed by Muscle Tech at 17, a paid contract too, not an ambassadorship. This was a real deal. So, I was guilty of just like ride it till the wheels fall off, man. If I die at 35, as long as it was doing what I love doing, we're good, man. And I just, that mindset is very dangerous. And there's a lot of things that can really, you just don't see properly, man. And now being a father, being a husband, man, and we've had this discussion. It's all about being optimal. We want to perform optimal. We want to be cognitively, at an optimal high, word recall, memory, just sharp as a tack every single day. We want to feel good, sleep good. We want to eat food that digests well. I mean, even the way I approach cheat meals now different because I just don't want to feel brain fog the next day, I love food. Don't get me wrong, but I pay for it if I eat something that I shouldn't. And, as you get older, priorities change. They definitely change. And even the way I've approached coaching has changed over a decade. I used to be a lot more aggressive 10 years ago, and it got me in a lot of trouble. And, thank God that I was able to continue to learn and hone in on my craft and, read literature and just study and listen to people like you and just, put it down on notes and then, correct errors and make failures and just learn from it. That's how you grow. Right. So, long tangent we're getting on, but, really what we're getting to, I think, is there is life after. So approaching it methodically, approaching it smart, getting labs done. Don't be cheap with labs. I see guys that they don't want to go spend $300-400 on labs, but they'll get $800 pair of Jordans and they're going to Starbucks every single day, spending $12 on a coffee. And it's like, dude, you are dealing with your life right here, and you want to feel good when you get into your 40s and 50s. You're going to have children more than likely. You want to be able to have the energy to play with them. You want to be there, be present, and it's about being optimal. So that is what, putting out great information on how to approach it methodically. And then, we deal with lifestyle guys too. We deal with people that just want to lose weight, feel great. Again, be optimal. These are CFOs, CEOs, high ranking people in business, corporate worlds, just your average people that stay at home moms maybe, or just guys that just want to look good for the beach, in the summer. So me and you have to approach every facet of the individual, from the top person at the Olympia down to that. And with the right knowledge, with the right passion, with the right leadership, which is what I'm seeing you're doing, and what a handful of us are trying to do is we're trying to change the outlook of this fitness realm that kind of has been tainted by social media in a way.
Yeah. And with the age thing, I mean, so I'm almost 50. It goes for the guys that are like in their 20s and 30s that are pursuing this, just be aware that it comes really fast. Like,
man, it does. I'll tell
you'll
you,
be my age before.
You don't look a day over 40, brother. I'll tell you that much. So
but it's just wild how fast it goes, and that's why you got to take care of yourself, because
the older you get, the faster the years go by, man. It's wild.
Yeah. And I can't imagine being in a place where you're the pinnacle of physical appearance, right? Like you're on you're winning the New York Pro, and then all of a sudden you're in a wheelchair at 50. I mean, it's got to be mentally devastating. So that's,
Yeah, I mean, listen, it is man, this could ruffle feathers, but I come from a family that has a history of addiction with substances and alcohol abuse. And I never looked at myself as an addict, but being 35 now, was definitely an addict during bodybuilding. It is an addiction. It can definitely become an addiction where, we don't want to look at ourselves like that, but it's an addiction. And if we aren't being honest with ourselves, it can really get us into a lot of trouble for the future of our lives. So that's why I think you have to make yourself aware of, what am I really doing? Is it really worth it? And am I just throwing Hail Marys every day, every week, every month, every year with my PED usage and just loading up on insulin and just loading up on this and that and this and that. And, I can't even sleep at night because, I have sleep apnea. Listen, like you said, it comes with a risk, right? We understand that any high level sport will do that. What I'm really doing is I'm speaking to the guys that they do it because they love it and they may never go above the state level. There's a better way to approach this. There's a better way to do it. It may take a little longer, but I promise you that slow, steady race is our slow, steady pace rather will win the race down the road. It's a long-term longevity marathon, man. So don't try to sprint through it. And, again, I know guys like Kurt will show you the right way from a medical standpoint. And the way that I coach lifestyle people or amateurs coming up, because that's more I'm focused on now, is I'm getting away from the top high level IFBB coaching that I've been involved with. I've been putting people on the Olympia stage for a decade now. And it was a great ride. We can get into stories about that and preps and stuff like that. But I find a lot of joy with the amateurs because they tend to listen a little easier. And you can kind of mold them, and develop them a little bit better. So I'm kind of
get your hands on them early, right? I always enjoy the first time competitors because you can at least control their experience from the beginning versus a lot of the pros you and I are not starting with when they were amateurs. Like I get guys that are already headed to that, going to go to those shows. They were with other people for years. So they already have kind of a perception of what it takes or what they use or how they train. I mean, you can still change. Like I have one guy in open who's very willing to learn, which is cool because a lot of those guys are pretty stubborn.
Oh yeah.
Versus like the lifestyle. And I'm like you. I think I enjoy to a large degree the lifestyle guys better because I can relate to it better. And I think it makes more sense to me to be able to get someone in great shape without abuse and keep it like over, like there's some level of sanity there, right? When you can, and 100%. The food doesn't have to be as extreme. The dieting's not as extreme. Nothing is, you don't have to peak them. It's just,
it's life, man. It's just life. Yeah. And then, at the end of the day too, I think it's really important. And I know you approach it like this is, as a coach, you can't look at your clients as just clients, like another number. I mean, these are actual people. These people have lives, like they're humans. They have the same stress we have at home, the possible financial stress. It's all the same stuff we all go through. So you actually have to care for the individual as a person. So getting into the psychology of that individual, not every athlete or client will really let you do that. But man, for the ones that do, and you could really get in there and see what makes them tick, what's their why are they doing what they're doing, and how do we get to, from point A to point B, get to the goal and then super exceed the goal. I mean, that is what it's all about, because then what you're doing is you're molding the individual for the future. When they go on their own and they don't need to work with you anymore, you made a significant impact in that individual's life. And that is, to me, is winning as a coach. That is what it's all about. You can get trophies and W's and titles, and that's great. That's phenomenal. But man, to make the impact on that individual and leave them with something where they are leaving you better than they came, and not just from a physique standpoint, but a mental standpoint, a spiritual standpoint, they're optimal, man. And then they could go be a better father, a better husband, businessman, brother, whatever the case is, man. They're just leaving you in a more optimal way. And that's what I dig about coaching now. That's what I'm all about.
Yeah, that's definitely, that's the win, right? Yeah. And I think the funny thing, I don't know if you ever got certified as a personal trainer in any of these things, ACE or NASM or any of these things.
Yeah.
One of the things years ago when I took the ACE test, you read this silly, it's gigantic, the book, it's like 900 pages. It's probably digital now, but I'm from a time when we actually had books.
You had to read book.
The overwhelming theme in the book was about rapport with your clients, and that's what's going to keep them, right? And I think when you're new at this stuff, you're like, what does that have to do with anything, right? They're out of shape and I'm getting them in shape. They pay me money, I give them exercise. And you realize that no, it's actually more about the relationship you form with someone than it is about some of the other stuff. That's much more important, I think, in the long run. Right?
Oh, man.
you tend to form these relationships. Like that's how like you and I, you know what I mean, got in touch like over these, you know, over time. I just think that that's just what occurs, and that's what also keeps you connected to someone, and also the one to listen to you, right? And it's reciprocal. You know what I mean? You and I learn from each other.
Oh, and people appreciate it, man. And it creates just this culture that you start, because that's what it's all about, is you're building a culture, man. Same thing with the podcast that you're doing. You are building a culture of proper information. So what environment and culture are we setting with our athletes? That is the most important thing. And that is a mistake I made as a young coach too, 10, 12 years ago, where I'm just, let me just do my job. Let me get through. I put them on stage and that's it, you know, and just, there's really no care. And then as you mature and you get older and you understand like this individual is a human, they have a life, you know, and I think becoming a father and a husband has really, really helped me in understanding all that. So really getting into the heart of the issue that someone may be going through, you know, like you check out a client, it's like, how are you? Not just like, oh, what's your body look like? What'd you do this week? Like, how are you doing mentally? What's going on in your heart? Like, what are you struggling with? You know, and that's really good stuff, man. So when you pair all that together, to me, that's a phenomenal coach. That's what makes a great coach. We hear about all the great coaches in the NBA and the NFL. It's the same mentality. They actually care about the individual. So you pair all that together, and then we come up with the right program to optimize these people, you know, learning how to read labs and obviously understanding the ratio of the labs and how do we fix it. And, you know, how can we look, you know, 30,000 feet ahead and kind of foresee what's going to happen in a way nutritionally and, you know, from a fatigue standpoint, how do we manage this and manage that? And it really comes together, man. And it makes this beautiful transformation, not only, again, internally, but externally, but also mentally as well. And that is the best way to go about it, I think, with every client. That's what I try to do. So, you know, getting into like, we could talk about, I mean, I'll let you lead the way, brother. We can talk about Olympia athletes, high level athletes. We can talk about, what do we do? Like, you know, maybe, I don't know if you can talk about, I mean, but what do we do as individuals?
Like, I think that could be an interesting thing, because I've recently changed what I do. I was coming from a place where I think I was out of the gym. I started exercising when I was young, like you, 12 or 13. And I did it all the way until 29. I had a corporate job in the city. I got married, built a house, had kids. And one day I just stopped going to the gym. I didn't mean to, I got busy. I understand when it happens. Like I was working way too much. I was commuting way too much. I was drinking way too much. Everything was disordered in my life, except my marriage and my family was not disordered, but, you know, work I think was not right. And, you know, obviously alcohol, I don't think is ever the right answer. And when I got back in at 39, I trained from 39 on like I was going to be a pro bodybuilder. So I think until very recently, that was kind of my goal. I lost all the muscle that I had gained when I was younger. I put on almost 100 pounds in that decade. Coming back, and and just recently, and a lot of it I think also lines up with meeting you. I think I changed some of the things to make myself run better in other areas of my life. I think I was focusing too much on my trainings. I brought my training volume way down. I'm currently only lifting 3 days a week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Sometimes I'll go on a Saturday or Sunday if it's not interfering with kid stuff. And I do cardio on the other days. And the funny thing is, my body composition is actually only improving. It's not getting worse. I think I was doing way too much before, and I was exhausted all the time, and I was starving all the time, and I had to eat way much more just to support that training. And it was just like vicious cycle. And I realized that I just wasn't needed. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone needs to train like that, right? There's genetic things there's other habits. You know, I've also been lifting for a long time, so my body might respond differently. But I've decided recently to focus more on other people's health. You know, put mine on autopilot.
You know, man, that's interesting, dude, because I went through the same thing. So I stopped competing in 2014. That was my last show, and that was it for me, because I have an irritable bowel disease. I have what's called ulcerative proctitis. It's a form of colitis, and it basically took me out. So anytime I would try to start a prep or utilize any type of oral or any type of heart, you know, tren or anything like that, you know, could even be Anavar, it would just tear me up. I mean, I'd have a systemic inflammatory response immediately. And that's when I knew that was it. God was He was calling me, you're done, you know, we're going to go do something else. This was it. I had to accept it. And my biggest, I think it was like 250. And I currently weigh 180. Yeah, I currently weigh 185 today. And but I always I started dabbling like little, like, you know, sprinkles of bodybuilding, like, well, you know, let me just run a little, you know, I'll do a cycle and then I'll throw in some post-workout insulin. You know, I know how to do it. So, you know, what could it hurt, right? Maybe I'll put some size on, or maybe I'll push this and push that. And then I would always sit back and be like, you know, what am I doing? Right? What is the overall goal, right? And I found out the same thing, that I train 4 times a week because my central nervous system was just getting fried.
Fried.
Yeah, where, you know, I'd finish a session because I trained pretty early in the morning, and I'd brain fog all day, and I just couldn't perform, and you know, I couldn't be there for my family the way that I wanted to be, and I was just like, this is not, my training is not matching my life, right? My life goals, my training is not matching. I need to synergize the two together so that they can enhance each other and do just enough, right? Because I feel like every man needs a solitude time, and the gym time is usually my solitude time. Or cardio, like you said, just being active, feeling good, being physically fit. And I noticed too, I actually started looking better. It's pretty funny that doing less at this age as you get older, getting just enough stimulation, as long as you're keeping your nutrition, as you know, on point, and keeping your labs right, all those ratios balanced out, great gut health, sleep optimization. I'm obsessed with sleeping the right way now too. That's such a big deal as I get older, man. You know, it's been great, and my goals have changed so much. Even the mindset, you know, where it's important, but I know that more so the training that I'm doing is more for longevity and for health and mobility and flexibility and being agile and still having strength. And from an aesthetic standpoint, yeah, I still want to look good. It is important. I'm not going to lie and say I don't want to look good. But it's not where it was 10 years ago, or when I was trying to sprinkle in bodybuilding, like, you know, maybe I'll do this or that, you know. So it can become a slippery slope, like I said, because at the end of the day, there is addictive aspect of competing and taking, you know, specific compounds and stacking them together, because we change fast. If you know what you're doing, like we do, you can change very fast. I mean, we could both prep ourselves in 12 weeks and probably do a total body transformation. We would probably grow into the prep and look completely different. But then what are we taking away from our lives? We're taking away time from our families, our jobs. We're not performing. We're not showing our clients what we need to show them. We're not there. It's impossible to do all at the same time. I always say that, you know, it's got to be difficult to compete at a very high level and then do what we do. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's got to be hard, especially with kids and a wife too, and then trying to balance that out, right? So like you said, when you were 29, you got a corporate job, the commute was long, so you lost the balance. You know, it was work, stress, drink some alcohol to cope with that. It's probably a coping mechanism. And, you know, you lost your solitude time. You lost your health. You lost what you were doing, what you loved for so long. And we can get into that slippery slope. I mean, that's happened to us all. So, you know, I guess what I'm saying and what I try to tell a lot of men is, like, especially guys that are coming out of competing, because they always say that a bodybuilder never retires fully, because the mindset is they'll say 5 years, I want to come back, I want to do a show. And it's kind of like, you got to really weigh your options. Like, is it matching your lifestyle, or is it just because you want to look a certain way, or do you really like getting on stage? And then are your priorities at home where they should be? Are you taking care of that first? Because if you're not, then you really need to rethink your outlook on everything that you're doing. And I think that also comes from having a healthy outlook on food, training, bodybuilding as a whole, where, you know, people always ask me, they're like, you know, did you see what this guy did at this pro show? And I'm like, I don't keep up with it anymore unless I have a guy in the show. I just, when I've handled my guys and I've taken care of my clients, I'm with my family. You know, I'm with my wife and my daughter, and they're going to get my undivided attention. At one point, you know, I knew everything that was going on, but that's, as I get older, you know, that's kind of where I'm at. It sounds like that's where you're at. And I'm a lot happier too, like that too.
Yeah,
I can say.
I am. I think I think the other thing, your daughter's pretty young still, right?
Mm-hmm.
How old is she now?
Almost 3.
Okay. I think you'll see also how important that is, and your influence on her, even indirectly, when she's bigger. Like we talk about like living like a bodybuilder. It's funny because that's still how I cook, probably the same as you. Like this is like, these are the silly things I still eat. It's like white rice, cream of rice every day. Like I have the same foods.
She likes all of it.
My family, I do all the cooking for my family. So my family eats the same stuff. Different portions of the same food, you know? I remember when my son, I sent you that picture. My son was like, he's 9 now, but when he was 5, in kindergarten, they had to make a poster for school of what their favorite food was. And all the kids was like nachos and pizza and this and that. My son was salmon and broccoli. That's what he knew. He didn't know any different.
Amazing, right?
Yeah. So it's funny, but I think that's what bodybuilding actually should mean, right? It's supposed to actually optimize your life. And I think that goes with the training too, and not training so much and focusing so much on that. There's something Bill Phillips taught me 30 years ago that I don't think I really absorbed it until recently when I was older to understand it, is that the better you get, the more efficient you should become, not less efficient, right? Like I think we tend to see the opposite in guys. They get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they do more and more drugs, and they eat more and more food, and they spend 4 hours a day in the gym. And you're like, why? What do you do? What else exists in your life? That wasn't the point of this.
Yeah. You become less efficient.
That doesn't make any sense.
No. You're 100% right. You're 100% right. And again, man, it might sound to an amateur or someone trying to turn pro that we're beating it down. That's not the case at all. What I try to tell guys is, listen, we have to be realistic. Are you going to be a top 10 or top 15 guy in the world? And if the answer is no, then make sure your priorities are set at home and with your career. Don't leave your job just so you can turn pro and then get 15 points at the New York Pro. It's just not worth it. I promise you, it's going to be a much healthier outlook to do it. You can still enjoy bodybuilding and still love it. But setting your priorities, because again, like you said, Kurt, you're leaving that legacy. I mean, your children watch what you eat. Therefore, they see dad and they're like, this is what dad eats. This is what I want. You're the spiritual leader of your home, right? So they're going to follow suit in what dad's doing. And that's just so cool. I mean, that's a perfect picture right there. And, and I hope men that are listening to this, that are fathers or husbands or soon to be fathers, understand where we're coming from. Kurt has been a father much longer than me, but I'm learning quickly over those close to 3 years, man, that there's nothing more important than that. So kind of a tangent in lifestyle, but I think it is important because a lot of podcasts, especially bodybuilding focused, we don't talk about this. No. And I know mental health is a big issue, and I'm sure you see this in the medical field, like mental. And we know that when we're on heavy cycles, that messes with neurotransmitters, especially the 19-nor drugs. From what I've seen, when you get on DECA, MPP, Tren, I mean, it just really wrecks brain functionality, right? So then we become even more erratic and not understanding all those things. So just giving encouragement to men just to really think your priorities straight. You can still do bodybuilding. You can still excel in it. You can still do phenomenal. But priorities first, and if you're top 10 in the world, or you're a Derek Lunsford, and he's a great picture too. And I love Derek because he's a family man now. He's got a daughter and a wife. And yes, he's genetic elite, but he's spending time with his family too. And, you don't want to leave behind a legacy of, dad was never present.
No, you definitely don't. And I think we go with the elite thing too. You talk about top 10 in the world. A lot of guys, I think, are misunderstand what that takes. It's a genetic thing, unfortunately. I have young guys ask me often how they would know if they're a genetic freak. Like we talked about, what separates a pro bodybuilder from an amateur bodybuilder from a regular person is your genetic response to training, food, and drugs. If you would know, because in the first 6 months on a cycle, you'd be the biggest dude in any gym. Yep. There's no, because we've both been around it, right? Like Jay Cutler's a great example, right? He was a freak.
Absolutely. Let me give you an example. I'm going to give you a real living example. I'm not going to name him, but he was top 10 in the Olympia one year that I coached him. We won a pro show together. Every show we either got second or we won, and then top 10 at the Olympia. but off the top of my head, I'll try to remember. But I know that he was getting pharmaceutical grade Anavar from CVS or Walgreens. It was the white tablets. I mean, the real, very, very costly, very expensive.
Like the Savant one, the Savient ones or whatever, when they were making it. Yeah.
He was taking 25 milligrams only. His testosterone didn't exceed 600 milligrams a week. His trend, he didn't want to go over 4. He was very health conscious too, which I loved. Trend didn't go over 400 milligrams a week. Masteron 400 to 500 milligrams a week, maybe. Growth hormone never went above 5 or 6. Proviron maybe 100, and Winstrol maybe pretty high at the last 1 to 2 weeks. 100 to 200 milligrams, which I know people are going to go, whoa. I don't advise that, by the way. I'm not telling anybody to do that. Please don't copy that. There's a rhyme or reason, and I'll let Kurt explain that if he ever wants to get into that. But that's it. I mean, guys, if you just, that's literally the Olympia cycle for this individual. There was nothing secretive. I mean, his response was unlike anything I've seen. And, I remember telling my wife, and I was like, this is why these guys are so elite, because I could take the same thing. And I will tell you this, when I did compete as an amateur, I went to 1,000 milligrams of tren. I did super high dosages, and I never looked better. I just got more side effects, and I felt worse, and it didn't do anything for me. Honestly made me worse, and it exacerbated my irritable bowel disease and probably caused those issues for me having to shut it down. Right. So it's exactly what Kurt's saying. It's genetics, it's hyper responders. So I guess what we're saying, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Kurt, but we're just saying, just be realistic about your expectations in the sport.
Yeah. If you need to use, well, with that, there are other pros too that use significantly more, right? I think still with them, they don't seem to experience the side effects though. That's, I think, the difference. Like I know plenty of amateurs who try to mimic those doses, and they're just ridden with side effects. If you're using so much that you're physically destroying yourself, it ain't the sport for you, right? Because the guys that'll win, it just seems much more natural to them.
And I'll say this because I was living in Vegas at this time and obviously training with Jay. So I'm going to use the word allegedly. But when Phil Heath turned pro in 2005, he won the NPC USA. He was only taking Deca.
Yep,
that's
true.
all he used, because he didn't know what he was doing. And not only that, he was eating fish fillet from McDonald's because he didn't know where to get fish from, or he didn't understand nutritionally of cooking, like fresh cod or whatever. And he went in and cleaned house. Unbelievable look. Just go back and look at the pictures. And then a year later, linked up with Hani Rambod and won the Colorado Pro and the New York Pro at 209 pounds, which 209 pounds at 5'10", 5'11" is really not that big, but the proportions, the insertions, the roundness, the three-dimensional look, it's just unbelievable. So just think about that. I mean, imagine if we did that. I mean, it's another level. So
it's another level, because it's what do you say his weight was? 210?
When he won his first 2 pro shows, he was 209, 210.
Yeah. So I'm 5'7" and I'm 210. So he looks very different than I do. And I'm pretty lean at 210. I'm not like fat at 210. But just a different thing. No, I've heard the same story, because Justin Harris actually, I think, was at that same pro qualifier competing against him. And I guess he walked up to him, and I guess Justin asked him what he was like. He was like, wow, you look amazing. What are you using? And he said, I don't know, this thing called Deca. Have you heard of it? Justin was like, that's what you're using? He's like, yeah, whatever, 2 shots a week or something, 400 milligrams. What?
Yeah, and I remember that, because I remember Justin, we were on the Muscle Mayhem boards back in the day, Chad Nichols' old message board, and Justin was a pretty big name on there because he was coming up and he was, getting higher level and workhorse, total workhorse. I mean, the guy, even to this day, and super, super knowledgeable, great guy. And, he was doing probably 10 times more work than Phil Heath. But again, it just shows you the genetic level, right? I mean, just how, and you can break this down in a much more eloquent way of, like you said, the receptor density and, how the body really just adapts to what you're putting in it, and just the response physiologically to weights, to nutrition. It's just on another level. I mean, naturally their IGF-1's probably much higher than than any of us, and just the response to everything they do. I mean, I'd say, I make a joke, you know, these guys look at weights and they grow from it almost. It's just kind of the way that
it's perfect alignment of all, right? There's 3 that we know of. Let's say there's 300 genes that control muscle and fat storage in the human body that we're aware of. And there's 77 that are directly responding to steroids. Like all steroids cause different specific gene response within muscles. They're all different. Like nandrolone causes a totally different response genetically than trenbolone versus testosterone. But the people like him, all the response lines up perfectly. Whereas like a guy like me or you, maybe, you know, 50 of the 70 line up great. So you look better than most people, but it's like that 1% that's just not quite Ronnie Coleman.
It's unbelievable.
You know,
it's crazy.
Or, you know, a Flex Wheeler, like that's just genetic freaks. Like I would say that one look, I don't know what that you're 93. It's probably the most perfect physique.
93 Arnold Classic. 93 Arnold Classic, yep.
And I don't think he ever nailed it ever again after that.
Probably the greatest. No, that was his #1 physique. And just like the 2001 Arnold for Ronnie, Jay's 2001 or 2009. Yeah, I mean, it's just out of this world stuff, man. It's just insane responses. So, you know, you just got to understand, you know, kind of how the sport works, right? It's just the way that it is. And I think that's on the highest level of any sport is going to come down to that. Yes, there's hard work. Do not take us out of context. We're not saying that, but the genetics, man, which, you know, we will do part 2, part 3, part 4 of this podcast. I think the next one, what we'll do is we'll really dive deep into contest prep. Yeah. And we'll share ideologies and thoughts behind it, and, you know, how we approach it. And, you know, I know a lot of people are very interested in, you know, how to, because I made a post about sodium chloride new salt, and, you know, basically what that's for, how I've utilized that. We can go into a little bit of that and kind of showcase people. But I want to do you know, I'm going to do a multi-part series with Kurt and Paul. So I really want to be able to get a lot of good information out. I think the cool thing with Kurt is me and him talk almost every day now. And, you know, Paul is too, but, you know, Kurt is a father and a husband, and we talk about how can we live an optimal lifestyle. So I think that's kind of like why I started kind of divulging into that. I think it's really important to get that message out.
Definitely. Yeah. I think if people want to, we could do the peaking one next, and we'll do it. We can do it on your channel. Right.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah. And if people have any other requests they want to hear from us, they can put in the comments.
Yeah. We can do a question and answer or
whatever.
Throw it out there, guys.
I think AJ and I see this as like an ongoing thing for, you know, indefinitely or whatever. So I don't think it's a one-off. So
definitely not a one-off.
I'll link all your stuff down below.
Appreciate it, man.
And we'll continue this soon. Okay, thank you, brother. It's always great talking to you.
Thank you.